Hey, when I born, I wasn't a little boy. My mother said I was 11 and a half pounds. That was those days, a lot of load. Anyway, a year and a half my father died. He brought home some sickness from the First World War. So I've been brought up by my mother and my grandfather. They beat the hell out of me for any occasion, just to show that, not to spoil me. I could be in a garden and then the servant came in and said, your mother said, no, don't do it. And I was doing nothing. Anyway, we lived countryside, had a nice, quite a big 15-room castle, about an hour from Budapest on the way to Vienna, on that section. And we had it, the place until the communists took over. And then to save it, they made a false sale, so the communists wouldn't take it. And then, on the way when the siege for Budapest was between the Germans and the Russians, the whole castle was absolutely destroyed. Two big marble columns was staying there. It was on a hill, and I understand there was like 10 times change hand between the Russians and the Germans, and the Russians and the Germans. It was a very big fight, because that was when the Germans went through the... Budapest was surrounded with the Russians, so they escaped through one way near our castle. Wait a minute, stop it now.
We're rolling again.
Say action.
Action.
Oh, anyway, I was, since childhood, fascinated with flying. And when I was 14, I started to train in glider planes. And 4 years later, the Army or the Navy or the Air Force recruited people, and of course they took those who knew about dynamics, the clouds, the engines, why an aeroplane flies. So we had a priority to have the first choice to become a pilot, because everybody wants to be a pilot, of course. So wait a second. They recruited me to the Hungarian Royal Air Force, and we started to train and fly on regular aeroplanes with propeller. Those planes are now so old, they're not even in a museum. And it was so undynamic, the construction, that more pilots died just by flying those planes or tried to fly it. Anyway, so Hungary had its own problem with the Russians, and so we had a front to supply the front, the Hungarian front, against the Russians. And those times the Germans was deep in Russia, and then Hungarians had a bottom part and also went into Russia, and we had many dogfights. Planes. The Russian planes was twice as fast as ours and had more guns on it. So it was like really a suicidal thing. One of the missions, they hit my plane and gasoline started to pour into the cabin, and I know it's going to burn, so I jumped out with a parachute, and I had a woolen scar, and that was full of gasoline, and it burns very slowly. So when I was coming in the air, coming down with a parachute, I reached to my neck and throw it away, not thinking of the consequences. The shawl went into the parachute and started to burn the parachute, and then it turned the parachute to a different direction and faster because the hole started to be much bigger. But that was lucky because it blew me back to the Hungarian side. So I get out of parachute, I know where it was the line, maybe 5 miles away. I was walking there, and it was nearly dark, and our own people, they saw me coming and start to shoot at me. They shoot anything. They was trigger happy. They were shooting anything moving. And I was screaming them in Hungarian, and they didn't understand it. So I got real mad and went behind a rock and then screamed, "Who is there in charge? Come here. This is Lieutenant Dobronyi from so-and-so squadron." So finally they stopped the fire, and then they instructed me to put my hands up. So when I came closer, they finally realized I had a Hungarian uniform. The other mission was from the big, heavy German plane, Junkers, I think, yeah, 52. We were flying every day, food and mostly wine out to the front, and came back with wounded soldiers. It was very interesting, very, very strenuous flight. This plane was a very, very good plane. It landed in a very short landing strip. And this went on until the end of the war, when they called us completely back because the Russians came so much forward. So they went all the way back to Budapest. And all my family was in Budapest in the cellars. All the old houses had a cellar. And that's where the people lived for months and months and months. And actually in one street were the Hungarians, and the other end was the Russians, and they were shooting at each other, except about 3 in the morning. So then we climbed out on our stomach, and with a big knife, and cut pieces off from frozen dead horses. There was no other food. Then came end of the war, we went home. I went back to Budapest. We had an apartment there. And it was very dangerous to walk in the street because the Russians collected all young men. And they went through a doctor, and then they shipped them to Russia. So I heard somewhere malaria. I didn't know what it was. It sounded very interesting. So when I went in front of the Russian doctor, he said, "What did you do in a war?" I said, "I was not in a war. I have malaria." So then they put me with the sick ones and let it go next day.